Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Please be seated. Okay, so first of all, welcome to this ADP annual lecture. My name is Shenjing He from the University of Hong Kong. I am the co-editor-in-chief for Area Development Policy. So each year we invited internationally renowned scholars to give an annual lecture for the journal. So I just realized our journal is having its 10th anniversary this year because, thank you. Yeah, time really flies. I realized that we are just 10 years old and we are about to grow from a baby to a teenager, right? So we still need your strong support. So so today we are very fortunate to have three very prominent scholars to speak on the very timely topic of place-based policies to resolve the societal challenges today. So for those of you who are not familiar with ADP, let me give you a very brief introduction to the journal. The journal published the first issue back in 2016. 10 years ago. And this is the only journal that under the RSA families that dedicated to research about and of the developing world. And some scholars actually corrected me that we should not use the term global south or developing world anymore, right? So probably we could use the word emerging economy, which is more appropriate to describe the geographical focus and the key emphasis of the journal. So ADP publishes original academic research examining the economic, political, cultural, and geographical contexts which play a fundamental role in shaping and developing regions, cities, rural areas, and the relationship between them. So ADP concentrates on issues related to previously, we mainly focusing on the greater BRICS region, but now we are also focusing on the emerging economy and also the dialogue between the more developed world and the developing world as well. So today we have very distinguished speakers speak to this annual lecture. Let me introduce them one by one. So first of all, we have Professor Boschma. I think I don't need to introduce him because he's he's renowned to everyone, right? His household name, particularly in this community. But if you attend RSA Congress for the first time, let me introduce Professor Boschma. He is a professor in regional economics in Utrecht University, and also he has affiliation to multiple universities in Europe, including the Stavanger University in Norway, and also Lund University in Sweden. And in Lund University, he was the director of the Center of Innovation, Research, and Competence in the learning economy. And he's also a member of the executive board of RSA for many years, since 2015. Currently, he serves as the chair of the RSA Journal Committee. Professor Boschma has published on evolutionary economic geography, geography of innovation, regional resilience, regional diversification, and smart specialization policy, and so on and so forth. Professor Boschma has been ranked every year since 2014 by Thomson Reuters among the top 1% of highly cited researchers worldwide in all scientific fields. And he's considered as one of the founding fathers of evolutionary economic geography. In 2024, he received the prestigious Walton Law Prize for his scientific achievement, which is considered as the Nobel Prize for Geography, the highest honor in the field of geography. So please join me in welcoming Professor Boschma. Should I also introduce?
Well, I think they heard already. I mean, maybe John, you can skip.
Yes, let me do it in one go. So, apart from Professor Boschma, we also have two distinguished scholars serving as the commentator for Rom's talk. First of all, we have Professor Simona Iammarino, who also gave a plenary speech this morning. So she is a professor of applied economics at the Gran Sasso Science Institute in Italy. She's also the visiting professor in the Department of Geography and Environment in LSE, where she was the head of the department back in 2014 to 2017. She is the co-editor of Journal of Economic Geography. She has been a long-term member of the Regional Study Association Executive Group and the board member. She was the chair of RSA Journal Committee, she just stepped down last year, right? As a long-term, prominent board members. She was elected the vice president of Italian Society of Economics in 2025, and also in 2024, Simona was awarded the ERSA European Prize in Regional Science, which is the highest prize in regional sciences. Okay, so thanks again, Simona, for serving as our commentator. And also we have Professor John Harrison, who is a professor of urban and regional studies at Loughborough University, where he is the associate dean for research and innovation. Professor John Harrison is an urban regional geographer interested in planning and governance of cities and regions. John is the deputy editor-in-chief for Regional Studies, one of the flagship journal for RSA, and also the section editor of Urban and Regional Horizons. He recently published multiple books, particularly this Planning Regional Futures and Region in Evolution, a history of regional planning. I think you have a feature session that introducing this book. So without further ado, let me give the floor to Professor Ron Boschma. Over to you. Thank you.
This one is not working. Okay, take my laptop.
Come in.
All right. Yeah. Thanks very much, Sang Ying, and thank you very much for the kind invitation to do the lecture. I'm very honored to be here and among such a big audience. So I'm very happy to share some ideas. Which I am thinking about place-based policy. So I would like to I hope it all works, yes. The structure of my talk will be as follows, right? So I first would like to start with the observation that nowadays we have to tackle many societal challenges in our research, right? So and it really steers our research in those directions. And of course, does not come as a surprise, especially for this audience, that I would claim that what is more needed than ever is a place-based policy to that, and I will give a few reasons for that. But we also have to connect it to a policy mix approach, right? So, and some people here in the room are actually working with that, but I haven't seen too much yet, and I really would like to share some ideas on that. How to do that, of course, is a big question, to combine a place-based approach and including a policy mix approach. I will, let's say, develop a kind of sympathetic critique to the policy mix literature, especially outside our field where the policy mix concept was actually developed. And I will try to adopt a kind of quantitative method to integrate both dimensions, a place-based approach and a policy mix approach, in order to see to what extent we can help policymakers in Europe to have better policy, but also to criticize the current thinking inside the European Union, and that is already around for a very long time, that we are confronted each time with top-down policies, right, in which place do not play a role or is actually marginalized. And now, of course, with the negotiations going on Thursday and Friday, we have a European summit in Cyprus. will be exactly about this, right? So how will the new budget from 2028 look onwards from 2028? And I'm not very optimistic about that, right? So we really should build a framework, an integrative framework to place-based policy in which we have maybe not even convince our community, but to go out of our community, to go to European leaders and make them aware of what type of work we do and why it is important. Well, there are many social challenges. I mean, too many to be mentioned, right, that we nowadays have to tackle. As I said before, my main claim will be that place-based policy are indispensable to promote competitiveness, to strengthen technological sovereignty, to facilitate green transition, and to achieve regional cohesion. So we have to get rid of place-blind policies that are imposed uniformly across all kinds of different regional contexts, because we are confronted with that all the time. And we have to instead develop a place-based policies that are tailor-made, that are made region-specific in terms of the needs that are formulated at the regional scale, the opportunities that are available to each region, which differ from region to region, but also the type of bottlenecks that we have to address when developing regional innovation policy or policies that address those societal challenges. So it is a call for a bottom-up rather than a top-down policy, which I think stands very much in contrast to what is happening nowadays in Europe. If we look at the competitiveness program, in which a lot of funding is going in the near future, it's already happening, on strategic autonomy and the Green Deal, and we really have to rethink and reconsider. So why place-based policy on competitiveness, right? I guess many of you have read the Draghi report, well, maybe not all, because it's a very long report. There are 2 volumes, a more popular one and a more, let's say, comprehensive one that is doing also a lot of analysis. And what we all know from the Draghi report, which has been fully embraced by the European leadership, is that there is little recognition of geography at all, right? Which is quite shocking because Europe was built on regions. Cohesion policy was the main pillar of European policy. And it is appalling to see that it is happening and that we are at this stage, right? So, so we have to communicate to Draghi at all to really reconsider those. And why is that? Because capabilities are crucial. Regional capabilities, those might be embodied in knowledge, in skills, in types of institutions that are key inputs for technological change, for competitiveness, and for the other social challenges I mentioned. Place-based policy does not necessarily mean that you have to focus on places only, right? It is also making the connection, right? So this is also what Europe is about, right? It is about exploiting complementarities that are across regions, that are across member states, and that we have to make the right connections in order to make that work. But as we also know, we need absorptive capacity to make those external linkages, because if you don't have absorptive capacity, nobody's interested to collaborate with you. But also when you collaborate with others, you need to have the external, you have the absorptive capacity to understand the external knowledge that you tap into when making connections. Oh, sorry. Okay, so yeah, okay. This is not synchronized. Okay, sorry about that. So regional capabilities should provide directionality policy, and this is what we have to communicate to the European level, because they conditions which opportunities are more feasible to develop in a region, and also which type of social challenges should be taken up realistically by what region, right? So it is not necessarily the case that all regions should do the same and taking up the same social challenges, as if we can just impose a top-down model, right? So what we tend to forget, and what Draghi especially forget, is that opportunities are everywhere in Europe. But they differ, of course, in nature. So every region has opportunities, but they widely differ because of the capabilities that have been accumulated in the past. So, of course, that gives a really good rationale for that we should avoid one-size-fits-all policies. Draghi is actually recommending that we, obsessed by the competition with the US and China, that we have to go for superstar regions and that we have to concentrate all the excellence there is, and therefore we have to forget about other regions. And that is a huge mistake. So we have to activate potential in every region that have remained unexploited so far. Other societal challenges, right? Technological sovereignty, right? So it's of course, there's a lot of confusion about the topic, about the concept. Suddenly, in the past, of course, globalization was always good, right? And we were trying to take the benefits from that. And now suddenly it becomes a problem because we have created dependencies and we have to do something about it. So when we look at technological sovereign policies of European countries, there's a very nice paper, I think it's still a working paper, by Lee et al. In 2024. And not unexpected, if you look at those technological sovereignty policy strategies that are proposed, they all look similar. They all go for the same. They go for cybersecurity, they go for AI, and all of that. And despite the fact that countries might have very different capabilities, and that has not been taken into account at all. So instead, what we should do, and what we should tell policymakers at the European scale, is that policy should be differentiated and should prioritize activities in which countries have strong regional capabilities. So it should be place-based. If not, we can never get out of this technological dependency on the US in Europe in terms of digital technology. So we really have to do our homework first and see where the capabilities are that should be activated in that respect. Of course, this is not to say that regions should strive for technological autonomy, right? That would be foolish to say, right? So you can even imagine that if you have the globe and there's just one region, which is the globe, nobody is depending on nobody. Well, if you go down the spatial scale, and the lower you go, and when you go to the neighborhood level, of course, it would be ridiculous to say that every neighborhood should be technologically autonomous, right? So there should be, we should also think carefully about what is the relevant spatial scale in that respect. Also, technological sovereignty contains, of course, a very political governance element, in the sense that what we know, of course, and many of us are doing this type of studies, is that regions often do not have the autonomy or the political power or the administrative abilities or the quality of government to implement technological sovereignty policy. So that should be taken into account when we account for those regional capabilities as a point of departure. Even more so, if you go for sovereignty policies, it means that you have to connect different policy domains and you have to create a kind of policy mix. But most of those policy domains, of course, are run by countries, not by regions, right? So we have to take that into account. We don't have to be naive, but what I still think what we should do is take regional capabilities as point of departure when implementing these sovereignty policies. Okay, green transition, all the societal challenges, right? So again, the same story. No need for top-down policy, like I feel that the Green Deal is very much part of that. We have many people here in the room that have advocated the fact that regions should play a critical role in the green transition, and there might be 3 reasons for that. One is that the climate change, of course, affects regions differently. in economic terms, in environmental terms, some regions are more vulnerable, and the types of vulnerabilities are different from regions to regions. But also in social terms, right? If you think about the just transition, so that is already a big reason why we should think about places and do that at that spatial scale. But also the green transition tends to unfold differently across regions because enabling and constraining factors are often place specific, right? So that might be the right way for interventions. And as I said before, the political and institutional capacity to actually do something about the green transition also very much varies across regions. So regions, again, play a very important role. Now, another reason why that is that, and I don't think I have to convince this audience here, is that place-based green policy should engage more directly with regional realities on the ground, which means empowering local people, listen to the needs and the problems they face, and try to tackle those. If not, we run the risk of fueling green discontent and making lagging regions perceive green policy as something that is imposed on them, as something that is in which they have no influence, in which they have no ownership, and therefore they feel they see it as a threat instead of something that could really help them and make their region better, in this case, greener. Again, it does not say that all green policies should be place-based. Yeah, of course, it's the global challenges that we have to face, and we have to coordinate action, first of all, and most of all, at the international scale, and do that. But it should be in hand with a place-based policy. All right. Now, so place-based policy is super important to really account for these societal challenges. I provided a number of reasons for, in terms of three societal challenges that we all work on and that we are worried about. But we should also be not naive and also follow a kind of policy mix approach, because all of those social challenges are super complex, are complicated to confront, and therefore we need to not just take one policy measure and think then and then expect that it should be effective, but of course it should be there should be a whole policy mix that should be aligned in order to have an effective policy. And the policy mix literature is very explicit about that, right? So it's saying, yeah, you need to have a coherent mix of policies, because a policy can only be effective when it is in tune with other types of policies that are already set in place. It is an historical process. A policy is also not something that is built from scratch, but it evolves over time in specific contexts, and therefore also policies might differ from region to region, and we should take that into account. Also, place-based policy is not, again, about just looking at places, but should also coordinate policies at different spatial scales. Super difficult to do, but we also have to align in that respect, and the policy mix literature is quite explicit about that. Now, that sounds nice, and I think there's a certain logic behind that, but at the same time, what I often observe in the policy mix literature, again, outside our field, I don't see it that much in our field, but outside our field, is that you predefine a kind of optimal model of policy mix, right? So you're gonna say, like the Green Deal, right? So you sit in Brussels and you think about, okay, what type of policy should be coordinated? Which policy should be aligned? And when we come to an agreement about that, then we're gonna impose that on all regional contexts. That is wrong to me, because this is a very functional approach which runs the risk of being ahistorical and acontextual, right? And we should do something about that. So many of those policy mix studies right now that are actually being carried out right now, they provide many key insights, but what I would like to do is go also a bit beyond case studies and try to go for a more formal approach in which we're going to see to what extent we can look at to what extent policy mixes can really make a difference in a certain regional context, but that might differ from region to region depending on the context where you're going to apply. But that, of course, makes that we have to address two crucial questions. First of all, how to assess systematically complementarities between policies and whether there is a good or bad fit between existing policies in regions, right? So if you implement a new policy, like a new green policy measures, to what extent will it fit the existing policy? That is easy to say, but might be quite hard to identify. And secondly, if that can be done, how to assess systematically the extent to which these existing policy mix conditions policy change in regions. So, first of all, then we have to develop a theory in to what extent this policy mix evolves over time. And so, maybe not as a surprise, I was thinking about evolutionary theory, in which if we look at how policies evolve over time, they do so in combination, which is part of an historical process that guides the search process for new policy instruments or new policies. So policies are not being developed from scratch, but policymakers might be inclined to follow the type of policies they have implemented in the past because they have built experience in that, and therefore they would favor some policies over other policies in which they have no experience whatsoever. And secondly, there will also be a selection mechanism. You might even try to implement a policy that is completely alien to what you have done in the past, and that might not survive the selection process. Think about the checks and balances that we have in our systems, and if the checks and if you introduce a new policy, it might not be implemented because it might be against treaties, or it might be against existing laws and therefore cannot be imposed. Elvira, I think maybe she's here in the room. I always like her quote. I always take this quote because I think it's spot on. Just the idea that I just explained, that past policy decisions constrains the range of options policymakers have, right, and what are available to them. They enable certain policy choices, but they also set constraints to what you can do when pursuing and trying to implement new policies. So if that's true, and I think that is a strong argumentation, it also means that regional legacies provide opportunities, but also set limits to the type and the direction of policy change, because history matters. You cannot just move into any other policy. You cannot just copy any policy from elsewhere if it does not if it is not in line in the context of your own policy mix. So adoption of some policy in a region is more feasible than others, right? And I don't think we think enough about that, and I think we should do that. What I propose is a framework to actually do that. And it's kind of data-driven approach, but I think it's worth to try out and to see to what extent we can actually learn from that. It's an analytical framework in which we go and identify systematically complementarities between policies. And just one method of doing that is co-occurrence analysis, in which you're going to see to what extent if you build portfolios of regions, of countries, it might be policy measures or it might be policy objectives, and you do that for all countries and you do it for all regions, and then you do co-occurrence analysis. You look at what type of combinations co-occur most frequently, which type of policies tend to co-occur at the national or the regional scale, and which policies are never combined at the national scale and the regional scale. And there might be some logic there, which might have something to do with the fact that which is just the idea of policy mixes, is which policies are more expected to be aligned in that respect. So if we do that, and there is actually a nice paper of that, but it's still a working paper, just done by the World Bank. Well, it was in 2025, so it's already out there it's not yet being published. And here is exactly what they did. So here, this is a World Bank paper in which they looked at climate policy. And they could distinguish between 42 policy measures in more than 100 countries. And they could follow those countries for over 50 years. So they could, for each year, they could really see what type of policy measure had been adopted by a country. So you build up a portfolio of policy measures in environmental policy in each country, and you compare many countries. So you do co-occurrence analysis. And the network is saying, so each node stands for one of those 42 policy measures. And if those nodes are closely connected in the network, it means that they co-occur often in the portfolio of environmental policies in countries. If they're far away from each other in the network, those combinations are almost never made, right? Well, you can talk for 1 hour only about this network, but it's just to give you an idea in what direction it might go. Now, what did we learn from that? This study actually showed that countries do adopt different green policies. They don't copy each other. They just develop different policies over time, and they're diverse in that respect. So that's already one, I think, very important observation. Another big question about this quite ambitious research program is to what extent do places then adopt coherent or fragmented policy mix? Which policies do they mix? And is that coherent or not? Because that is one of the main questions in the policy mix literature. Is it coherent? Because if it is coherent, it can become effective. And it will lead to a good performance, in this case, a green performance. And to what extent is coherence of policy mix good or bad? Because it is not, so the policy mix literature might say, well, yeah, you need a coherent policy, but you can also think about the very corrupt country which is very much aligned, and all policies are very coherent in that respect, but of course it would lead to, well, most likely to a very bad performance in that respect. So that is also a thing that we have to think about. But more importantly, what I think is very exciting about this literature is that we can actually define to what extent there is directionality in new policy adoptions in places, right? So so there might be some regular patterns that we can observe in the data from which we can learn something. And also to what extent are places more likely to adopt new policies that are complementary to existing ones, because that is what we expect. And again, back to this working paper by the World Bank, this is exactly what they found. It's a path-dependent process. So when countries adopt new green policies, it's very much aligned to the type of policies they have carried out in the past. They do not deviate too much from that. So there are trajectories, there are policy trajectories over time, and then for us it's up to how to characterize those particular policy trajectories, right? So, and I think that is a very intriguing and very interesting question that we have to take on. Is it possible to define policy opportunity spaces, right? So what if we look at the regional context and the histories that that regions have gone through, can we really identify what type of policies are feasible, which type of policies are completely not feasible and therefore should not be taken on board? And therefore a top-down policy, again, going back to my introduction, would never work in that respect. And last but not least would be a final question that would be very relevant, is to what extent do those policy changes that countries or regions actually make have an effect in places? And there's a very bright student, a PhD student in Oxford, who actually run already some analysis on that and find that policy experimentation, so kind of a bit unrelated but not too much, when introducing new policy in a region, had the best outcomes in terms of green policy, of green performance, right? So it brings on the table the question to what extent you can deviate from the past policies you have implemented, you have adopted in the past, and if you deviate a bit from that, whether that would bring better performances than staying very close to what you have been doing, because it might also result in a very political lock-in, which might be also detrimental to the type of policy objectives that you want to pursue. Okay, I thank you for your attention. Oh, well, okay. I thank you for your attention. And I'm just happy to share that after a long, long trajectory, at least part of those ideas have been accepted now in regional studies. So I'm super happy about that. So yeah, and but it's not yet online, so you can also go to the working paper if you want to know more about that. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Ron, for offering us a very compelling theoretical tour and also a powerful analytical framework for us. This is also exactly what ADP is trying to publish too. I hope that you have a second version that can be published in ADP in the future. Yep.
Part of it.
Part of it, yes.
I will do
it's an ongoing research. So next, without further ado, may I invite Simona to provide a short comment.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ron. Possibly I'm here because we have been friends for 30 years, so normally we agree on everything. However, so I mean, I had the slides in advance, obviously, and I want just to maybe concentrate more, not on the things that I'm aligned with you, because the general picture is obviously to be shared, but to maybe focus on some areas that are more to be thought of. You know, you started with societal challenges, now are called societal challenges, are competitive, twin transition, sovereignty, inequality. Again, it seems to me that, I mean, these are the global challenges, have always been with very strong regional footprints and effects, impacts, which I don't find it particularly new, right? In the sense it's been crafted into a different language, but we have seen this for a very, very long time. So place-based, there is a slight difference on what I see and I think of, I've thought about place-based identified with bottom-up. Because in my understanding, in all these years also involvement together with the European Commission, place-based, or I mean bottom-up is a way, an approach that needs also, in various degrees, a sort of complementarity with top-down, particularly where, and we know this, institutional capacity is weak. So, for example, smart specialization as a sort of policy umbrella and the ADP process and the requirements are a sort of top-down that then is complemented with bottom-up that comes from the specificity of the region. So I don't see this sort of dichotomy or interpretation that puts together these two things. But in terms of policy, let me just make, and maybe it's me, I'm becoming, in a way, quite angry on what we also have heard in the exit. Not on you, no, definitely not, obviously not. But what is the target of policy? What do we do when territories, and we have a few, as I showed this morning, right? When capabilities are weak Linkages are weak too. Institutions are weak. The aim would be to build up local capacity, to try to create regional futures in terms of opportunities, not necessarily competitiveness. And so it's also in the scale of values we have, there is a fundamental shift towards not well-being, not opportunities that might not be the edge of competitiveness at all, but, you know, giving something to people. They can go ahead and they can, you know, think about a different route to development. I mean, I struggle to understand technological sovereignty, how can be put at the local and regional level, as you said, and I agree completely. I just want to quote the 1 million definition of technological sovereignty, and I quote one that, in my opinion, is one of the clearest: the ability of a state or federation of state to provide the technologies critical for its welfare, again, competitiveness and ability to act, and to be able to develop them or source them from others without structural dependency. This is Adler and other in 2023, which is something that cannot really be brought down at the local level, as you correctly pointed out. But the focus is really, really going into that direction also because that direction is strictly linked with the shift to defense, to arms, to, you know, a very, very different rhetoric. On the other hand, we are not talking at all about the European strength. Europe has strength. This doesn't come out clearly from Draghi and followers. Machinery, automotive technologies, robotic, quantum technology, circular economy, satellite technologies, aviation, biotech, and most of everything else, regulatory settings, which prevent us to have the big tech, at least so far. Thankfully, okay? So, I mean, and there is something in the Draghi report that actually puts this as a European weakness.
Yeah.
Okay? So, I believe also that we do need a European-level Green Deal because all areas of the world have a statement, but obviously, as you say, we need policy tools to tackle the consequences of these big deals, okay, at the territorial level. On the policy mix, definitely, I agree. I see that coming from maybe my background of a pure economist a few centuries ago, independence of targets and instrument, Timbergen, 1952, complementarity, exactly. I know you know him. And, you know, but for now 5 decades, we have been talking about, you know, top-down, bottom-up, multi-level governance, and all this has been thrown from out of the window. So to finish here, and one thing, Ron, although I wouldn't choose the World Bank to talk about place-based.
World Bank?
World Bank examples.
Yeah.
I'm refreshed to know that they are discovering path dependence. So that's a good point. But I wouldn't
It's a working
really
paper.
choose. Yeah, no, I saw it. I had a look at it. But I mean, you know, finally, I mean, the basic argument is, it is really at this point good that we criticize what cohesion policy and all the reforms that I was talking about this morning criticize this framework at a time when it's going down the drain, because this is what is happening, and we can shout as much as we can, but I think it's anyway going down the drain. Do we really need to align our understanding of regions, of territorial inequality, align it to their obsession on competitiveness, sovereignty, strategic autonomy, defense, I'm not sure that that is the right thing to do. I read more and more that cohesion policy has been a redistributive policy in a, totally, discarding way, but we do not have evidence of this. It has boosted, paradoxically, the strong regions of Europe, precisely those that have capabilities, good institutions, and therefore overall competitiveness of Europe. At the same time, however, trying not to forget about the left behind places, which now will be forgotten.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Simona, for this very thought-provoking commentary and also insightful sharing. So that will make an excellent commentary to be published along with Ron's paper. Yeah.
Did you already publish?
Yes. So let me listen to what John has to say, and then we will invite Ron to respond to both Simona and John.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you, Shenjing, and the editor of ADP for the invitation to participate. Thank you also to Ron for an excellent presentation, but also providing us the slides and not changing them between sending us the slides and doing the presentation, which is very helpful. So my interest in the presentation and what Ron was talking about today is really from the perspective of somebody who this word around integration. So what enables integration to happen, but also what are the barriers and the obstacles to it. So from my perspective, I'm really interested in kind of the explanatory capacity of different perspectives and how they come together to help us to explain regional development, regional policy, but also, kind of as Shenjing introduced, my kind of interest in kind of regional planning is how different visions, different plans, different designs for regions variously complement each other, contradict each other, compete and overlap. And I think it's really interesting, kind of this focus on the policy dimension that Ron's presented to us this evening. I think those four words are really important. So complement, contradict, compete and overlap. And that really, for me, gets to the kind of the hub of what we're thinking about when we talk about integration. We can obviously add other words, but I think in the context of ADP, we're thinking about the words area, development and policy. So for me, that is, and I'm going to talk through the lens of regions, regional development and regional policy. There are clearly other words and ways we can do that, but if we're going to try and bring coherence to kind of our understanding of regions, I think they kind of really frame some of the kind of critical questions about how we think about integration and where it happens and the reasons why it maybe doesn't happen as much as we would hope so. I think what really excites me kind of in terms of the presentation is that the way that you kind of cover all three aspects. So there's area, there's development, and there's policy. Mere mortals like I just try and do one, and I'm not sure I'm very successful at that. So to actually speak across all three, so area development policy, but also regions, regional development, regional policy, is something that, yeah, let's be honest, is slightly scary, but well done. And I say that because to have the ambition to do that is important. We need people and we need to be ambitious in terms of our research, not to focus in on the minutiae, but often to step back and think about some of those bigger picture questions. So the other aspect of that is that I want to say well done in the sense that it was accessible. I don't know, many people might have been to presentations similar to this where people try and take on these kind of ambitious challenges and it's inaccessible. And I think one of the great strengths of the presentation, and I look forward to reading the paper, is the accessible part to it. So, with all the positive things, my role here is not just to do positive commentary, it's to kind of offer some constructive critical comments and some thoughts to feed into it. So I'm going to feed my kind of thoughts in around two words, or two comments summarised in the words who and how. As someone who frames their research around questions of what, where, who, how, why, and finishing with the kind of what I would call the critical question, the so what, or what is at stake, I think the structure of the presentation it was kind of really complementary. And what I really liked was that you start out with the what question, the societal challenges, and also the policy challenges. You also cover the where, so this is very clearly framed around a kind of an EU context, but it's a framework and an approach which can be considered and stress test across space and across scale. The thing that really stood out for me, though, was the 7 slides addressing the question, why? I think it's the one that we often as researchers overlook. It's important to us, but we don't always articulate it as strongly as we should do. But all of that gets to the one that I think is the critical one, and it's the word how. How do we go about this? How do we do it? So I was really drawn to the slide where you talk about the kind of evolutionary framework on place-based policy. If I'm being critical, I would say that you could argue that some of the how questions actually return to questions of what and where. So how does the policy mix of regions look? Is a case of which policies or what policies and where that mix is being observed. How different is the adoption of policies in regions? How coherent or fragmented is the policy mix in regions? This is not issued as a kind of criticism per se, it's more maybe a note of caution that we can ask how questions in two different ways. Yes, before we can get to the crux of this, we absolutely need to identify which policies are often or never combined in regions and at the regional scale. You can frame this, as you've done in the paper, as how questions, but there are other how questions that matter, and I would argue matter much more. So my how questions are actually how are questions, and can be summarised thus. How are the policies combined in regions and how are the policies combined in regions and at the regional scale? i.e., how is this enabled? Similarly, how are policies prevented or blocked from being combined in regions at the regional scale? So 3 key words for me: enabling, prevented, and blocked. There are also in your presentation other how are questions, okay? So I think that's what we need to be asking, not in place of the how questions, but as two sides of the same coin. I'm actually really pleased in the presentation you said that there were 2 critical questions, because they're the exact same 2 questions that I've got written down in front of me that I think it kind of really get to, not the kind of the how questions that could also be reframed as kind of what and where questions, but the how to. So you emphasise the how to assess systematically complementarities between policies and whether there is a good or bad fit between existing policies in regions. And also how to assess systematically the extent to which existing policy mix conditions policy change in regions. I think those are fundamental questions. They go beyond how, which could be deferred back to a what and where question, to the how to. How do we go about doing this as researchers? It gets to your final slides. So your final slides are really about what's at stake. And you get to this really critical question that you touch on, which is coherence of policy mix good or bad for regions? And I think we got a sense of what you thought on that, but I guess the question for me is, you presented the 2 extreme versions of kind of policy coherence in a policy mix, and then the extreme version. But what do you see as the answer to that kind of key question? All right. So I guess I've pulled the pin on the grenade there. So I'm going to move back to kind of more comfortable ground on kind of the how and the who questions. So how are the policies combined in regions and at the regional scale, i.e. how is this enabled? And how are policies prevented, blocked from being combined in regions? This for me is the critical gap. It also leads to the question which I think the presentation was fairly silent on, and that is the question of who. So I think in the presentation you refer to the EU, you also mention at times the World Bank, but I think the key question is who or what is doing the enabling and the blocking. So I'm sure I'm not the only person that noticed on your opening slide of the presentation, you very explicitly say you're in search for a quantitative method. And I think that kind of ties up with the kind of the how questions that you present in the presentation. So what I'm trying to say here is I'm not pitching a qualitative against quantitative kind of perspective. In the spirit of your title, which is around an integrated place-based approach to societal challenges, I want to try and pitch the complementary alternative. So searching for a quantitative method helps address the how questions that you ask, but I would argue that it will not help address other important how are questions, which a search for qualitative methods would potentially generate and lead you towards. So if we have these 2 additional how questions and we turn them into who questions, where the who becomes active rather than passive in the research, I think we get to a kind of additional point, an additional kind of lens, where we still end up back at the same place, asking the critical question of what's at stake, but we arrive at it in a different way. So the questions of how are policies combined in regions and at the regional scale becomes a question of who or what is doing the combining, how are they doing it, and critically, why are they doing it? The question about how our policies prevented, blocked from being combined in regions becomes the question, who or what is doing that preventing and blocking, how are they blocking it, and why are they preventing it from happening? Ultimately, I see this as kind of the complementary alternative because you can't do one without the other. And I think what you outline in terms of the co-occurrence is one route that gets us to that critical question. I think there's a separate pathway, which is then the complementary alternative, that is really important for how we go about this. So to conclude and try and bring it together, I'm excited about the how questions you're asking, and I think the co-occurrence approach that you presented for us is going to be really helpful, but it also does exactly what all good research should do. It generates other questions and provides inspiration for others to build on. I think you've done that, and I'm definitely in on that, and I'm sure in the audience we're equally inspired in terms of how we can take this forward. I'm also really excited to see this being badged under the ADP banner. As I said at the outset, to speak across area development policy or regions, regional development and regional policy is no mean feat. But my comments highlight, probably somewhat unsurprisingly, that perspective and vantage points matter. As a qualitative researcher, it was the first thing that I saw in the presentation, and therefore I'm also conscious that the way that I would approach this is kind of inspired or shaped by that. And I think that's what's at the heart of the journal ADP and something that we need to be aware of. But we often assume with area development policy that the context and the perspective and vantage point is around diverse geographic and spatial perspectives, but it goes beyond that. I think what you've done is you've provided a framework for us to think about that's accessible for engaging in comparison across space and scale. And I'm really kind of excited to see, I suppose, the responses that we get in relation to that. But I hope my comments focusing on who and how are also point towards the importance of other perspectives and where ADP is well placed to enable that through the inevitable responses that follow, we start to think about the different cultures of policy making, but also thinking about the different societal challenges that Simona was alluding to, because we have certain global challenges, but in different regions, different places, we have different societal challenges as they kind of come through. But I think it also reflects, and I'm conscious that my feedback here and comments do, it also kind of reflects who the people are who are doing the research and where we're doing it from, and the perspective. I think we've always got to be conscious of that. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Thank you so much, John. I can see you already have a manuscript ready to submit to us. And your comments are very thoughtful, also provide a framework for other, the audience to engage with Ron's work as well. So that is very helpful. So Ron, do you have any quick response to Simona and
John? Good comments. Now, thank you for your feedback. I think you did a very thorough job, so thanks so much. I'm not sure whether I can answer all questions, right? I think it also has to do with the fact that this is super ambitious, right? So it's really thinking out loud, and of course it's almost, we have a Dutch expression, but you won't understand that. It's really about thinking wild and big, right? So, and then of course it makes you vulnerable, right? On many dimensions. So I'm completely aware of that, and now you get almost in panic and you say, oh no, there are many gaps to be filled, right? So and let's try to address this as soon as possible, but that of course takes very much time. So yeah, super pleased with the comments. I think they're excellent. Okay, let me just say a few things. About top-down, bottom-up, right? So it's not bottom-up, of course, right? So actually, when coming here, I was reading again the work of Barca, and of course these are the foundational papers, right? So the 2009 paper that he did, and actually he was making that point, right? So it's a bottom-up. It's not per se a bottom-up approach in the sense that. Everything should come from the region and therefore should be applauded, but it is very much in combination with top-down policies, and there's an interaction between the two, right? So as long as And also there is the Bark et al. 2012 paper with I think Andres is there and Phil McCann. They wrote a wonderful paper about that, in which they were actually addressing what if there's a top-down policy that should account for a bottom-up approach, then you really have to formulate a number of requirements in order to make that work. And one of them was, for example, conditionalities, right? So you have to define those conditionalities. These are kind of guiding principles that are defined at the top-down level, but the regions are still so free to implement that the way they want to, right? So at least to some extent. So I think this is a point well taken that we should take on board. Yes, okay. I completely agree with you, Simona, about the fact that that also Draghi, as you said, rightly so, that they see regulation because they see Europe as there are too many regulations, right? Trump is complaining about that on a daily basis because it would block their big companies, their big high-tech companies, and we would impose them with barriers on our European market, and that should be tackled. No, I think as a European Union, we're super rich to have those type of regulations, not only because they steer us into a direction that we feel more comfortable with, but also it sets a kind of selection environment in which we know that those regulations exist, and then develop technologies taking those on board instead of trying to try to ignore them or to get rid of those regulations, right? So I think indeed you could even think about a kind of European model that really takes into account those regulations as a kind of input for technology change, which could give us a competitive advantage at the global scale. Well, let the American companies complain about it, and they forget about how to deal with that in a technological way.
You could write another paper about it.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, let me take. Sorry, Man, you made some excellent point. We can talk about that.
Yes.
Okay, so John, perfect. I mean, I really liked. I was thinking about when you say, okay, in a way, also different types of policies are enabling them, but they might also block each other, right? So there might even be competition, right? So to different types of policies. I got a bit of a naive idea, I think, that I said, okay, but there are limits to policy learning, but there's more on to that process of policy dynamics that you outlined. So I think that was super useful. I have no idea about the mechanisms behind this policy dynamics, right? So I went into political science literature because that's probably the group of scientists that we should get in contact with. And I didn't find too much, to be honest. And that's probably because I didn't read all of that. Well, most probably that is the reason. But also it makes you think really what are the mechanisms behind it. If you have a good theory, right, then this is only it's a partial job, right? So it's what you would expect, what you think is more likely to occur, but why it occur and what type of mechanisms might be behind it. Is the second part of the scientific exercise that we have to do, right? And that opens up many questions how that might be done. So point very well taken. Yes, the who question, right? So the agents that are involved. I was thinking about that when coming here, right? So you have here a big community that look at agents of change, right? So and that is even not only about policy, but it is about all civil society and all of that, political movements, social movements, citizens that participate actively in policies in policy formulations, in policy objectives, but also the way policies are implemented. And that is not part of this, right? So let's be honest about that, right? So, and I was thinking about when doing this, how can we combine the two? And I think maybe a first step in that direction, I saw I love the work, for example, by Christian Beens and Bernard Truffer. They do configurational analysis, right? In which they actually develop networks, right? In which they put agents and policies and regulations in the same type of network, right? So they include the agents in the type of networks I was talking about before. So maybe that is a way to go forward to integrate the both, but you could also think about the division of labor. Right, so and that I think comes back to your other comment, right? So quantitative analysis and qualitative approaches, of course, they should be combined, right? So because the quantitative analysis that I propose leave out many things that are equally interesting, if not even more interesting. What is the process of policy? Who is acting? Who decides what type of policies will be dominant in regions, etc., etc., and that might also have very region-specific outcomes. So that is a big part of the way to explain policy change and who is in charge and what type of coalitions are formed and why and all of that, right? So, but this approach has very limited tools in order to do that, right? So indeed, yes, we should have complementary approaches in which we're going to combine quantitative and qualitative approaches. So I cannot agree more on that. Okay?
Thank you. Thank you so much. We are slightly behind the schedule, but I think we can still take one or two very quick questions, any burning questions that you may have before we go to gala dinner. Yes, please. Please identify yourself. Yeah, maybe just these two questions. Who goes first? Maybe the lady goes first. Please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. My name is Maria Rastvorova. I'm an associate professor at Krok University in Kyiv, and also I'm a postdoc researcher at the University of Graz. And I'm very pleased to be at this annual conference, and as well I'm very pleased and excited about this lecture. And actually, my question is related to the security issue. Considering the geopolitical turbulence worldwide and the situation with the US and as well a full-scale Russian military invasion ongoing for more than 4 years already, are the security issues considered in the place-based policies in the EU, and has their importance increased in this geopolitical turbulence? Thanks.
Yeah, okay, yeah, yeah, thank you. Very important question, right? So, yes, I think I'm not so sure whether place-based policies are really considered in that respect, right? So my argument is that they should, right? So first of all, that the security issue are there, the challenges are being formulated, but the way to work it out, I think you need the place-based policies and make because we make the US much richer, right? Because now the increase of our military expenditures, much of that is going to the US, right? So what we want to develop is own capacities, right? In that respect, and my argument is that should be place-based. So Poland should do something where they have strong capabilities in and take that up, while France should do something else, and that should be coordinated at the European Union. Now, I'm not so sure whether there's willingness in the European Union to make that division of labor, right? So, and that they are willing to make this type of collaboration, which is absolutely essential to have a very effective security policy in that end. I think, if I'm not wrong, we are developing different 7 different tanks in Europe, right? So there is no coordination there. And we have to integrate that. We have to coordinate that, and we have to exploit the type of capabilities that are present in different regions and try to activate those. I think that is super important.
And the issue of border regions.
Yeah, exactly.
Border regions are really on the front, obviously. Yeah.
And when we talk about security issues, right? When I'm in Poland, it's a very different debate than when we do that in Ireland, right? So here also place matters.
Okay, so one final question, please.
Yeah, thank you, Dominique Forêt. So thanks, Ron, for the discussion. Place-based policy, so you mentioned it 50 times, right? And actually, this is a bit like a fetish also. Huh? You know, in the presence of the fetish, all problems are going to be solved. But then, I mean, we are missing probably, you know, a bit going deeper on what is a place-based policy, because if you look at the literature on blind place policy, we have a lot of studies on the toolkit, you know, the toolbox of what is a blind policy for innovation, you know. And you have all these papers. This is about patent, R&D tax credit, and subsidies, etc. This is all place blind, and you have serious literature on this and evidence, etc. So, but do we have a toolkit for place-based policy, or this is more like a more large approach, or, you know, a sort of philosophy or logic? And maybe there is no really a toolbox. So what do you think about this? Maybe the nature of place-based policy means that there is no really a toolbox.
Okay, Dominic.
Or do we have?
Let me just take a random example where a smart specialization policy, you might be familiar with that. There is a huge toolbox there. We have built up experience since 2014. So we are now in 2026. So okay, so of course in many countries it started a bit later in 2016 or 2017, but we really have acquired a lot of experience with smart specialization strategies, right? So we have collected the enormous amount of experience on place-based policies, right? So I think it was you, I think in your presentation that you were referring to the prognos and reports in which they showed exactly when looking at the regional development funds, how they have been implemented and to what extent they have become effective. It's a huge policy toolbox, and it has already been done, and it is completely place-based. And what is wrong with part of our community, well, this is not the regional community, but it is more the innovation studies community, is that their problem is that they actually think. They don't think about geography, and they don't think about space. And that is where they're wrong. And that's why we have to inform them about this, right? So, and show them that you can actually do something. And that's why I think it's a full strategy, what is happening right now in Europe, thinking about the multi-annual financial framework, in which this regional dimension will get lost, despite all the experiences, all the obvious benefits that we show in many empirical research, and they just ignore it, and they just go on, and the regions are not prominent anymore in the future strategy. And
great.
You're convinced. Good.
Okay, so that was an excellent answer. So Simona and John, do you have any final remarks? So let's let's thank all the three speakers. And also, I would like to extend the invitation to all the audience, because today all the three speakers are from Europe. They are based in Europe, but as ADP spirit, that we would like to, engage a broader discussion, particularly people who are outside of Europe. You are most welcome to provide a commentary or a short essay to engage with three speakers' work. And John already provided a very useful framework, who and how question, right? So you're most welcome to address these who and how questions, and send your commentary to me directly, and then we can see whether it's suitable to be published along with, the three speakers' work. Okay, so with that, let's conclude today's ADP annual lecture, and thank you so much for staying late with us. Thank you.